It didn't come from an email or a side meeting in HR. No, it came from a microphone, held in the manicured hands of our new COO, Jeffrey Lorne, as he stood at the center of our company-wide global launch meeting. 147 employees froze. Some turned their heads toward me. Others just stared down at their hands, pretending this wasn't happening in real time. Jeffrey's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. We appreciate her many years of service, but leadership must evolve. Please return your badge. No one said a word. My badge, still clipped to my blazer, turned red on the screen behind me. In one tap, he had revoked my access, deleted my credentials, and severed 19 years of history. Just like that. I didn't move at first, not out of confusion, out of restraint, because I had built everything they were launching today. The global backbone system, Etherlink, was my blueprint, my architecture, my security protocol. I had spent the last 6 years developing its framework, the last 6 months stress testing every node, and the last 6 days sleeping barely 4 hours per night just to get it deployment ready. I didn't speak. I reached for my badge, but before unclipping it, I unhooked the tiny walnut-colored USB drive attached to the lanyard. My fingers brushed over the etched message, one I knew by heart. Build what they can't steal. My son gave it to me on my birthday. 5 years ago, back when I still believed loyalty was a two-way street, the room remained painfully silent. Even the executive assistant, who used to bring me peppermint tea during late-night code pushes, looked away. Jeffrey smiled wider. He thought it was over. He didn't know that the drive in my palm still contained the authentication token, the one I never handed over, the one they'd need at the final stage of deployment. I placed the badge gently on the table, nodded once to the team I used to lead, and walked out of the room, my heels echoing across the concrete like gunshots. No goodbyes, no thank you, just silence thick enough to drown in. And outside that glass door, I whispered to myself, "You'll need my signature for that." The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the sound of Jeffrey's voice and the sea of stunned silence in that glass-walled conference room. Outside, the sun was too bright for how numb I felt. I stood for a moment in the corridor, staring blankly at the security badge now stripped of access, its red strip blinking with quiet finality. 19 years. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just breathed in the sterile air of the 12th floor and reminded myself, I had seen this company when its servers were duct-taped to folding tables. When Core Nova was just 4 people and a dream printed on foam core in a co-working space with broken coffee machines. I was there before the glass walls. Before Jeffrey. Back when code mattered more than optics. I started as a systems analyst. Back when the highest praise was, "It didn't crash today." I wrote my first infrastructure script at midnight after a 16-hour shift. I didn't go home. I slept on the floor beside the server rack with a granola bar in one hand and a packet of bug reports in the other. In 2009, I caught a permissions bug 6 hours before a multi-million-dollar transaction. It would have leaked data from a global client. That fix saved the company from a lawsuit that would have crushed it. In 2015, during a migration update, a back-end misfire corrupted the entire client database. The CTO panicked. Legal panicked? I didn't. I wrote a recovery script from scratch and restored 98% of the data in 2 days flat. And in 2020, while most of the staff was off for Thanksgiving, I intercepted a ransomware attack that had already bypassed 3 layers of protection. The final firewall was a rule I had quietly written weeks earlier, just in case. Nobody remembers those moments. They just remember the launch party, and the one I wasn't invited to. I missed my son's college graduation to handle that 2015 rollback. He wore his cap and gown and FaceTimed me from the quad. I was in a server room, covered in coffee stains and network logs, whispering, "I'm proud of you," through chattering teeth and a broken connection. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "I know what you do matters." I told myself I'd be there for the next big milestone. But there was always another outage, another crisis, another deployment. And now, the very system I sacrificed for, the one I built down to its digital bones, had become my executioner. Jeffrey Lorne didn't see the code. He saw the budget lines. 6 months ago, he arrived with polished shoes, slide decks full of buzzwords, and a mission to modernize our thinking. He called Etherlink, my security-first global deployment framework, a relic of outdated paranoia. In a meeting 2 weeks ago, he laughed and said, "We need systems that scale with agility, not systems built like Cold War bunkers." He'd never spent a night fighting off a cyber attack, never cleaned up the pieces after a contractor forgot to encrypt user data. To him, the legacy I built wasn't too complex, it was simply too inconvenient. He wanted low code, centralized, simplified. What he meant was controllable. Back in my car, I pulled up my inbox, skimming past the flood of automated deactivation notices until one subject line caught my eye. Urgent. Deployment license. Final term. It was from legal. I had flagged this email weeks ago. No one responded. No one even opened it. Inside was a single paragraph. Per Clause 9.3, Global Deployment License expires July 16th at 11:47 a.m. unless dual authentication is verified by original architect and acting COO. I stared at the line. The breath in my chest stilled. They fired me at 11:03 a.m. The system required my signature by 11:47 a.m. And I was no longer there to give it. I looked at the small walnut-colored USB resting in the passenger seat. My son's words engraved on it. Build what they can't steal. They didn't just fire me. They just walked away from the only key that could open the final gate. And I didn't plan on chasing them. I sat behind the wheel of my car, the email still glowing on my phone. 11:47 a.m. That was the ticking clock now, the cutoff, the final gate only I could open. But while the system I built waited in silent pause, the man now claiming credit for it was likely upstairs, rehearsing his sound bites. Jeffrey Lorne. He hadn't even been at Cornova a full 6 months, but in that short time, he'd managed to bulldoze departments, fast-track his chosen favorites, and rebrand everything he touched as transformational. He moved through the company like a redecoration project, whiteboards in hand, buzzwords at the ready. He was what executives called a culture shift, what the rest of us called a storm dressed in Prada. I remember the first time I met him. He shook my hand and said, "You must be the legendary Naraya, the one who builds mazes only she can solve." I smiled politely. I didn't know then that it wasn't a compliment. It was foreshadowing. Jeffrey didn't want systems that protected the company. He wanted systems he could control, easily, quickly, without friction, without the people who understood how they worked, people like me. His mission was clear: remove the complexity, remove the history, and, if needed, remove the people who held it all together. It started subtly. Senior engineers were reassigned. Project leads with over 10 years of tenure were moved into strategic advisory roles with no actual authority. He brought in a new tech team from a startup he once consulted for. Fresh faces, all under 35, some still in grad school. He called them the future, one afternoon. I walked into a meeting room where we were reviewing server load balancing. Jeffrey interrupted me mid-sentence. "Naraya, no offense, but we're trying to speed things up, not bury everyone in encryption layers from the Stone Age." He laughed. So did a few around him. He looked around the table and added, "You're a brilliant bottleneck, but still a bottleneck." That word stuck with me, not because it was untrue, but because it was lazy. He didn't care why I'd built redundancy into Etherlink. He didn't understand what those layers prevented. He just wanted speed, simplicity, and a system that didn't require a woman in her 50s to sign off on every critical step. 2 weeks later, I saw a draft of a press release circulating internally. It was meant for Tech Trend Weekly, a major industry publication. The headline read, COO, Jeffrey Lorne leads collaborative innovation to launch. Etherlink, a cross-team success story. Cross-team? There was no mention of me. No mention of the 6 years I spent designing the deployment structure. Not a word about the recovery protocol I wrote on a red-eye flight between Boston and San Jose when the network went dark in 2021. They didn't even get the architecture right. The diagrams were oversimplified, the language vague. But that wasn't the point. The goal wasn't accuracy, it was ownership. Jeffrey had already scheduled an appearance on a podcast called Disruptors Unplugged. I overheard him boasting in the hallway. We're going to tell the story behind Etherlink. People love a good reinvention tale. Reinvention. As if my legacy was an outdated hard drive waiting to be reformatted. It wasn't the erasure that hurt the most. It was the replacement. Of truth with narrative, of complexity with sound bites, of builders with marketers. I looked down at the USB still in my hand, its wooden casing warm from the sun through the windshield. Build what they can't steal. He could take my title. He could take my seat. He could take the credit. But not the key. Not the one that would matter most. In 44 minutes. When I opened my laptop, the first thing I did was try to access the latest deployment documentation. Access denied. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold, blinking message across my screen. Next, I tried the architecture logs, then the internal security protocols. One by one, every door I'd once had a master key to slammed shut. I was locked out of my own design, not even an error code, just the silence of digital exile. They didn't just remove me, they erased me. I sat in my kitchen, lit only by the dull afternoon light slanting through half-drawn blinds. Coffee cold, air still. The quiet felt heavier than it should. I tried Slack. No responses. The people I'd mentored, trained, laughed with over late-night debugging marathons. Gone. Some hadn't even read my message. Others had, and chose not to reply. A week ago, I could walk into any room and finish someone's thought before they said it. Now, I was a name in a company directory flagged deactivated. That was how fast loyalty evaporated. I thought of Amira, my closest peer in systems. We'd built the load balancing protocols together over 2 quarters and 28 pots of coffee. I texted her, just checking in, hope you're well. No response. 2 hours later, I saw she had updated her LinkedIn profile picture. Not blocked, just invisible. I stared at the screen and forced myself to breathe. This wasn't paranoia. This was procedure. I was being cauterized from the organization, sealed off like a wound they didn't want reopening. But if they were scrubbing me from the system, who, then, had final authentication control? I opened a new message window. One name came to mind. Max Garvin. He was a second-year intern I had taken under my wing. Bright, awkward, asked too many questions, which meant I trusted him. Max had helped me simulate a token bridge between our DevSecOps layers. His curiosity hadn't yet been replaced with corporate polish. I typed, Max, do you still have read access to the deployment certs? Need a quiet favor? Just confirm who has final level override on Etherlink. He replied within 5 minutes. Sure? Gimme 15. I closed the lid and rubbed my eyes. My heart beat a little harder than it should have. Part of me hoped he'd say it had already been reassigned, that this last thread tying me to Cornova had already been clipped. But then the message came in. Found something weird. Only 2 names in the final override matrix. He attached a screenshot. I opened it. There it was. COO, access key. Jeffrey Lorne, system architect override. Naraya Cade. No backups, no proxies, no alternates. Just me. Yours is still active, Max added. Biometric. Registered in Core Auth node. If you're out, they're locked. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. For all Jeffrey's power moves, he'd never thought to strip my token, probably didn't even know how, or assumed someone else had taken care of it. They were so eager to show me the door. They didn't realize I was the lock. I typed back, "Don't share this with anyone, thanks. Max, you've done more than you know." He replied with a thumbs up and a "glad to help," like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle. They built walls around me, invisible ones, quiet exclusion, silence instead of conflict, erasure instead of confrontation. But they forgot about the one wall that couldn't be removed by HR. Me. The key still worked, and the clock was still ticking. 11:47 a.m. was coming, and they wouldn't be ready. The moment I saw my name, still listed as the sole system architect with final override rights, I knew one thing. I wasn't out. Not yet. I hadn't been deleted. Just delayed. I pulled the curtains halfway shut and powered up the secure terminal I'd set up at home years ago during the pandemic. My hands moved with methodical precision, a rhythm carved from habit and instinct. I navigated through back-end access nodes via a backdoor port only 3 people ever knew existed. 2 had left the company. The third was me. The system didn't even flinch. No flags, no alerts. It welcomed me like nothing had changed. Because, technically, it hadn't. Not yet. My cursor hovered over the final execution layer of Etherlink, the part of the system responsible for authenticating the global rollout. The shell interface blinked calmly. Waiting. It was still dormant. I hadn't authorized launch. And without my biometric signature, it wouldn't proceed. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't sabotage. This was structure. It was exactly what I was hired to design. Failsafe layers. No one could bypass that final lock unless I handed over the key. And they never asked. They assumed, like so many do, that what's built will just work. I didn't touch the launch command. I didn't override anything. I simply left it alone. Sometimes the most powerful action is no action at all. Still, I knew silence alone wasn't enough. If this came down to legal questions later, and it would, I'd need proof. Evidence that I hadn't tampered, altered, or interfered in any way. I opened a fresh terminal window and began extracting the logs, system activity, access permissions, token verification timestamps, every relevant event recorded in the past 72 hours. I compressed them into an encrypted zip file and backed it up to an offline drive. Then, I emailed a copy to myself. Subject line: System Integrity Snapshot, for legal reference only. There, clean, undeniable. I wasn't building a trap. I was preserving the truth. A ping broke the silence. Max. Hey! Found something weird in Legal Archive. Thought you'd want to see. Attached was a PDF scan, crisp, stamped, dated April 2019. My breath caught before I even opened it. It was an appendix to the original Etherlink Infrastructure Agreement, a document I hadn't seen in years. Titled, Authentication Ownership Clause, Final Deployment Protocol. I scanned the lines quickly, then slowed as I read one paragraph twice, 3 times. In the event of global rollout, final phase authentication must be executed by the originating system architect, defined as the individual who designed and authored 80% or more of the core deployment protocol. This authentication is non-transferable unless revoked by said individual in writing. Beneath it, in black ink, was my full name, Naraya Cade. Title, Senior Infrastructure Architect signed. Witnessed. Filed. I remembered that day. I'd pushed for this clause myself, back when security meant something. Legal told me it was just formality, something for the record. Turns out, it was the record. Jeffrey hadn't overwritten my authority because he couldn't. Not unless I revoked it. And I hadn't. So here we were. I typed back to Max. Keep that file. Don't send it anywhere else. Just trust your instincts. He responded with a thumbs up emoji and, always do. I smiled for the first time in days. Not because I had won. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accuracy, about principle, about the quiet power of building systems with rules no ego could bend. I reached for the small walnut-colored USB still resting beside me, the one my son had given me, engraved with the words, "Build what they can't steal." They hadn't, because I hadn't given it away. The system was functioning exactly as designed. They thought I had been removed, but they never removed the code. And the code still knew who built it. I leaned back, folding my hands quietly. Let them think everything was ready. Let them walk onto that stage and call it theirs. They could press every button they wanted. But until I said go, nothing would move. The banner hanging above the stage read, "Welcome to the new Core Nova." I sat in my car across the street, engine off, watching through the windshield as Jeffrey stepped into the spotlight like a man who had just invented oxygen. A sea of folding chairs stretched before him, every seat filled. Cameras flashed. Applause swelled. The champagne table shimmered behind him, already half emptied by overeager interns. The same building I used to walk into at 7:15 a.m. sharp now pulsed with music and theatrical lighting. They had covered the glass facade with marketing jargon and a sleek logo refresh. Everything was louder now, brighter, sharper, and emptier. I glanced at the time. 11:06 a.m. Jeffrey took the mic with that practiced, effortless confidence people mistake for competence. His voice carried clearly through the plaza's PA system. Core Nova 2.0 begins today. We've cleaned out the clutter, restructured our backbone, and rebuilt a system that's finally worthy of the future. Clutter. That was me, I supposed. And every line of legacy code I'd written to protect the very future he was now celebrating. I leaned back in the driver's seat, my fingers resting on the steering wheel. The sunlight pouring over my lap like stage lighting I was never meant to stand beneath. Across the street, my work was being launched without me. Or so they thought. Jeffrey clicked through slides, colorful graphs, performance metrics, screenshots of the Etherlink dashboard I had designed over 6 exhausting years. Only now. They looked sterile, washed of nuance, stripped of the human logic that held them together. This, he said, is what happens when innovation is truly collaborative. Collaborative. The word hit harder than clutter. There had been no collaboration when I wrote the contingency protocols by hand at 2 a.m. No brainstorming when I coded the disaster recovery failsafe during a blizzard in 2021. No team effort when I missed my son's birthday because a core node had crashed midstream. But of course, no one tells those stories at press events. No one claps for caution. I pulled the USB drive from my coat pocket and turned it slowly in my fingers. The smooth wooden casing warmed in my palm. 5 engraved words looked up at me. Build what they can't steal. They hadn't. Not really. They had the body, not the soul. And the soul still required my permission to breathe. I exhaled slowly, trying not to feel anything. But the ache was there, familiar and sharp. Watching them toast to my labor like I'd never existed. Hearing my systems rebranded as revolutionary, as if security had only now become trendy. I told myself to look away. Instead, I kept watching. Just then, my phone buzzed in the center console. A new message. No name attached. Just a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then tapped it open. You're being watched. Get ready. My chest tightened. I looked around. The parking garage was mostly empty. A delivery van sat 2 levels up. No one in sight. I checked my side mirrors. Nothing. Still. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Not the building. Not the stage. Me. Before I could respond. The message vanished from the screen. Not deleted. Expired. like it had been programmed to disappear. I stared at the black screen in my hand, the reflection of my face staring back. A ripple of uncertainty passed through me, but not fear. Not yet. Just a sharpening awareness. Someone knew. And they wanted me to know they knew. I saved a screenshot, then slipped the phone back in the console. Outside, Jeffrey raised a glass and smiled for the camera. The crowd erupted again, but in the space between applause, I heard something far more valuable than noise. Silence. And it was mine. I started the car. Let them celebrate. Let them believe the launch was already in motion. Let them call it their victory. They could have the stage, the system. However, was still waiting for me. The sky was still dark when I got home. Not the comforting kind of dark, but the empty, gray kind that creeps in before the sun makes up its mind. I didn't sleep. I didn't try to. Instead, I sat at my desk, laptop open, cursor blinking in an empty email draft. To boardcornova.com. Subject: Launch risk warning. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I had written the subject line 3 times already. The message itself was simple, precise, exactly the way I was taught to report threats. The system has not passed final phase authentication. Global deployment is currently in a frozen state. Please verify authorization chain before proceeding. No emotion, no drama, just facts. But then I stopped typing, and I stared at the screen, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not fear. Just that hollow, weighted silence that fills you when you realize no one's listening, not because they can't hear you, but because they've already decided not to. I sat back and let the quiet swallow me. The clock on my screen said 5:58 a.m. There was still time. I could hit send. I could stop it all. But then what? They had already removed me. They had already staged the celebration. They had already chosen optics over architecture. Would they even read it? Would it matter? I thought of the last boardroom meeting I attended, 6 months ago. I had voiced concerns about the growing obsession with simplification, removing safety nets, disabling critical verification layers. Jeffrey had laughed, as usual, one of the newer board members, young, fast-talking, investment-bred, cut me off mid-sentence. We need speed over legacy control. We trust the new infrastructure team. Everyone clapped. No one asked me what that decision would cost them. Now here I was, staring at a message that could prevent a global freeze, and realizing they weren't people who wanted saving. Not from me. Not from anyone they'd already deemed irrelevant. I highlighted the message. Pressed delete. The draft vanished without a sound. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. They had uninvited me from the conversation. I was not required to translate anymore. I reached for my coffee mug, cold and untouched. The room felt impossibly still. Morning light was barely stretching through the window blinds, painting dull lines across my desk. And there, beside my keyboard, sat the thing that had started all of this. The USB drive, walnut casing, smooth, worn at the edges, build what they can't steal. I picked it up and held it for a moment, then plugged it in. A single folder opened. Etherlink, core, auth inside. I had stored everything. The full compliance diagram, the 3-phase deployment verification chain, the original 2019 agreement that stated only the system architect could finalize authentication, and the override map, clear as day, which outlined what would happen if one of the 2 required signatures was missing. Not a failure, not a crash. Just an indefinite wait state. The system would hold position, keep everything secure, not move forward, not backward, no damage, no leak, no alert, just nothing. It was the ultimate deadlock, and I'd built it that way for a reason, because some mistakes should never be allowed to go live. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. I could feel the seconds slipping now, not like sand through fingers, but like tension winding up a spring. They had 4 hours and 45 minutes left. That's how long the system would wait before forcing a full rollback. 11:47 a.m. That number had never meant anything before, but now it was a threshold, a point of no return. I closed the folder, removed the USB, tucked it into my pocket, poured myself a new cup of coffee. They still had time, but the time no longer belonged to them. The clock at the front of the room struck 11:03 a.m. Time didn't just pass, it snapped, loud and final, like a rope cut under tension. I was still seated at the end of the long conference table, back straight, palms flat, as Jeffrey stood up and smoothed his blazer. His voice was calm, cheerful even, like someone reading a sales figure, just another item on his agenda. "Effective immediately," he said. "Naraya Cade is no longer with Cornova. We thank her for her service." A thin smile played across his face as he nodded to the HR rep standing near the exit. She moved quickly, almost too quickly, like this had been rehearsed. Maybe it had. No one in the room spoke, no one even coughed. The massive dashboard behind Jeffrey displayed a digital countdown. Global launch countdown. 44 minutes remaining. The seconds ticked away in bright, optimistic blue. 44 minutes until they took everything I had built and launched it without me. I pushed back from the table slowly, each movement deliberate. My chair let out a soft scrape against the polished concrete floor. The sound made someone flinch. I didn't look to see who. The HR rep extended her hand. Palm up. She wasn't meeting my eyes either. I unclipped my badge and dropped it in her hand with a faint click. Then I reached into my pocket and removed the USB, the walnut one, engraved and worn smooth over years of use. I slipped it into my coat without comment. It was still warm. I turned toward the door. Not a word, not a glance. My heels echoed across the floor with an eerie finality, like a metronome marking the end of something sacred. Behind me, someone whispered, "Wait, wasn't she the one who—" Then silence. I didn't stop walking. I had given this company 19 years. I had built the very architecture they were about to launch, line by line, layer by layer, and now I was being discarded like a retired manual, unmentioned, uninvited. Still, I didn't say a thing, because the system was already saying it for me. As I reached the touchless exit panel, a soft chime rang out from the main dashboard behind me. No one noticed. The room had moved on, already gearing up for Jeffrey's press call. Cameras being mounted, cables taped down, celebration in progress. But on the corner of the screen, barely visible against the backdrop of launch graphics, appeared a single line of code. Auth chain 02. Signature mismatch detected. Queued for hold state. It wasn't red. Not yet, just a flicker, a whisper. No one turned their head. No one paused the meeting. Not even Jeffrey, who had already begun shaking hands and thanking team leads for making history. But I saw it, and the system saw me. That was all that mattered. I stepped through the glass door and into the hallway, where the air was cooler, quieter, removed from the noise and gloss of the room I'd just left. It felt like crossing into another world, one that didn't applaud when someone was erased. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists. I just walked. Security guards stood near the elevators, waiting. They didn't say a word as I passed, didn't meet my gaze. They were just part of the set, furniture in the theater of control. I pressed the elevator button and waited. 43 minutes left on the countdown. But the timer they didn't know about had already started. As the elevator doors opened, I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and curled my fingers around the USB. It was still warm from my palm, still solid, still mine. The system was intact. The code was clean. The protocol was precise. They thought I'd left quietly, but the moment I stepped out of that room, the launch had already begun to fail. Silently, elegantly, unstoppably, and no one had even noticed. The house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that calms you, but the kind that wraps itself around your thoughts like a net. I sat alone at my desk, coffee gone cold beside me, staring at a blank screen that slowly flickered to life. A gray glow filled the room as clouds thickened beyond the windows. My fingers moved with muscle memory, no urgency, no hesitation, as I logged into a private monitoring interface I hadn't touched in months. 11:24 a.m. They were launching now. Or trying to. The console updated in real time. I watched as the first line appeared. Initiating Phase 3 Global Sync. A moment later, regional nodes began populating the screen. Tokyo, green. Dublin, green. São Paulo, green. Then, they froze. Green turned to pending, then to amber, then to flashing error prompts. Tokyo, timed out waiting for handshake. Frankfurt, sync incomplete. Verification loop stalled. New York, authorization interrupted. Please confirm chain. Each line dropped like a metronome. Steady and unbothered. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just sat and watched. I hadn't touched a thing. No interference. No sabotage. All I had done was not say, go. The system was simply following its design. I reached for the coffee out of habit, then remembered it was cold. I didn't bother warming it. There were more pressing things happening, though none of them involved me anymore. Or at least, not publicly. A blinking prompt appeared on the right-hand corner of my dashboard. It didn't come from the main launch screen. It came from the root diagnostic layer, the level only I had written, the level no one else had ever asked to understand. Authorization key 2. Missing system halt triggered at 11:24. 11. AM required signature. Naraya Cade, not found. There it was. Quiet, undeniable. The system wasn't broken. It was waiting for me. Across the world. Engineers were likely scrambling, checking connections, calling vendors, refreshing tokens. But they wouldn't find a bug. There was no bug. The launch wasn't crashing. It simply wasn't moving. Not forward, not backward. Just frozen. Exactly as I'd designed. Exactly what they had signed off on in 2019 when they wanted my name on the documentation. My authority on the chain of custody. My assurance the system would never deploy without a last layer of protection. And now that protection was the very thing they had fired. I minimized the error log and stared out the window. No rain, no wind, just stillness. From here, I couldn't hear the chaos erupting on the other side of the city, inside that bright, over-decorated event hall where Jeffrey had raised a glass and declared victory. I imagined the growing discomfort, the slack-jawed confusion as minutes passed and nothing happened. Their 44-minute countdown had turned into a silent standoff, and I wasn't smiling. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. This wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. You don't build a global launch system worth $960 million and leave the keys lying around. You don't entrust it to people who call caution clutter. You don't let visionaries rewrite blueprints they can't read. I checked the timestamp on the hold state. 11:24 and 11 seconds. If no signature was provided by 11:47 a.m., the system would enter timed lockdown. Rollback, null state, launch canceled. No explosions, no headlines, just silence. I took a deep breath, then opened my notebook. Not digital, real paper. I jotted a single line. System responded as expected. Root defense held. I closed it gently. No alarms, no flashing lights, just the sound of my pen leaving the paper. Somewhere, someone would soon realize what had happened, but not yet. I reached for the cold coffee and took a sip. Across 6 continents, screens were blinking, but in this room, nothing moved. And that, finally, was enough. Inside Core Nova's headquarters. The air had shifted. It was no longer electric with anticipation. It was tense, stalled, 11:39 a.m., and nothing was moving. The countdown display in the launch command center read 8 minutes remaining. The screen should have been filling with streaming data, confirmation lights, sync reports, server handshakes. Instead, it blinked on standby, awaiting something. That never came. Jeffrey stood in the center of it all, arms crossed too tightly over his chest, jaw locked. The smile he wore during the launch ceremony had vanished 30 minutes ago. "Why are we still in pre-sync?" he asked sharply. No one answered right away. People were scrambling across terminals, whispering behind clipboards, consulting with engineers on their phones. The tech lead finally stepped forward. "Everything's online, sir. The system's just not moving." "Not moving?" Jeffrey snapped. "Is it frozen?" "No," the man replied. "It's waiting." The word hung in the air like a threat. "Waiting for what?" Jeffrey demanded. The room pulsed with tension. The general counsel from legal stepped in, holding a tablet, scrolling fast, her lips moving as she reread contract language. "There's something in the original infrastructure license, Section 9.3. She looked up, uneasy. "Final launch requires dual authentication, COO, and system architect." Jeffrey stared at her. "We signed off on that, but we've restructured since then. Can we override?" She hesitated. It's hard-coded, Jeffrey, and biometric." A silence fell over the room, like the oxygen had been sucked out. The screen flashed again. Authorization key 2, missing required signature, Naraya Cade, not found. A few people turned and looked at each other. Some winced. A few, mostly younger staffers, seemed visibly confused. Jeffrey's face tightened. He looked like a man gripping a lever that was no longer connected to anything. "You're telling me the system is held hostage by someone we let go?" The legal counsel didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jeffrey walked away from the screen and picked up a phone. His voice dropped to a sharp whisper, but the desperation had begun to leak through. Meanwhile, across the city, my phone vibrated gently on the table beside me. I was sitting outside, on the small balcony of my apartment, a soft breeze moving through the leaves. For the first time that day, I'd stepped away from the screen. A steaming cup of tea sat in my hand. The notification said, "From Max Garvin, audio file." I pressed play. Jeffrey's voice came through clear, crisp, and unfiltered. "We don't need Naraya. She's obsolete. She was useful once, sure, but she's a bottleneck now. We've rebuilt the whole thing anyway. She's just dead weight." The recording ended. No edits. No doubt. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't feel rage, not even vindication, just stillness. I looked at the time, 11:41 a.m. Max hadn't said a word in the message. He didn't need to. His choice to record that meeting, and to send it now, spoke volumes. He had been watching, listening. Maybe others had too. I didn't respond. I simply saved the file, filed it away, and returned to my tea. Across 6 continents, contracts were waiting, executives were pacing, clients were emailing, and Cornova? They were stuck, on a system designed to protect itself from people like Jeffrey. I took a long sip, the warmth spreading across my chest. Not revenge, not retribution, just peace. The kind that only comes when the truth finally speaks for itself. And today, it had. The system failed to blink. At 11:47 a.m., every global deployment screen across Cornova's international network went dark. Not black, just neutral. Paused. On hold. In the Cornova command center, a full room of executives, engineers, and PR handlers froze in real time. Someone gasped. A notification had just replaced the countdown screen. License expired. Code L4747X. Global deployment. Cancelled authorization. Key 2. Not renewed. Jeffrey took one step toward the screen. His hands splayed open in disbelief. "Restart the launch. We've got backups. Why isn't this running? No one moved. A junior system admin slowly turned from his terminal. Sir, the global deployment key expired and can't be regenerated without signature match validation. We revoked her credentials, Jeffrey barked. Yes, the admin said flatly. And the biometric signature tied to the backup key was hers. Silence, the kind that sucks oxygen out of the walls. Someone behind Jeffrey whispered, Zurich just called. They're pulling the deal. Another voice, urgent. Dubai wants to review the security framework again. They said it no longer meets baseline ISO specs. Jeffrey's neck turned red. He shouted at legal. Override it. Issue a forced push. But the lead counsel only held up her tablet with the original 2019 deployment clause, highlighted in yellow. Termination of architect contract triggers automatic lockout of primary launch system unless explicitly re-signed by original credentialed creator. This clause was never revoked, she said softly. It's embedded in the patent terms. We'd need her consent to proceed. Jeffrey looked as if someone had slammed a door in his chest. Across the city, in a second-floor apartment shaded by sycamore trees. I watched it happen in silence. My screen had already gone black. The system was designed to time out upon license expiration, then self-archive unless a verified signal from both authentication keys reauthorized its runtime. I held the second key, still on that little wooden USB, still in my pocket. I closed my laptop. Then came the email. From board.coronova.com. Subject, urgent, return request, Naraya. On behalf of the board, we acknowledge the strategic missteps of this past week. Your role as architect and custodian of Etherlink was clearly undervalued and misrepresented. Please consider reinstating your access. We are prepared to compensate appropriately. Name your price. Sincerely, Board of Directors, Coronova. I stared at the message. Let it sit there on my screen. No apology, no accountability, just a desperate request dressed in polite syntax. I didn't reply. I didn't even click Mark as read. Instead, I slid my phone into a drawer and walked into the kitchen, refilling my mug with chamomile tea. I didn't feel victorious, just finished. Across downtown, the fallout moved fast. By 2:00 p.m., Jeffrey was summoned to an emergency board session. He left the building pale, holding a thin envelope. His assistant refused to meet his eyes. Later that evening, a Coronova press release quietly announced his administrative leave effective immediately pending an internal review. Max texted me once. They're scrambling. Your silence is louder than anything you could have said. I didn't reply to him either. I stood by the window for a long time that afternoon, watched the wind press through the tree branches like a hand through water. I hadn't felt this kind of stillness in years. They had called me outdated, redundant, too cautious for the pace of change. And yet it was that very caution, the foresight to embed failsafes, not as revenge, but as protection, that stopped them in their tracks. They fired me in front of 147 people at 11:03 a.m. But at 11:47 a.m., I didn't raise my voice. I didn't press send. I just let the code speak. And sometimes, silence is the sharpest answer. The train station was busy, but I moved through it as if walking through fog, silent, clear-minded, weightless. I had no badge, no boardroom pass, no eyes trailing behind me to dissect my expression. Only a soft leather satchel and the small wooden USB in my palm, warm from my grip. The grain of the wood was worn smooth where my thumb had traced the letters hundreds of times. Build what they can't steal. My son had carved those words when I first told him about Etherlink, back when it was just lines of code and long nights. I took the escalator to the third level of the public tech hub across from Union Square, where a modest but fiercely independent conference was being held. It wasn't the kind of place with sponsorship logos or grand keynote stages. It was a room of engineers, ethicists, developers, and those who still believed that technology could serve people instead of controlling them. At 12:30 p.m., I plugged in the USB and projected my screen onto a small wall behind me. The crowd hushed. Most didn't know who I was. A few did, and looked at me like I was a ghost. I smiled softly. My name is Naraya Cade. 19 years ago, I started building a secure integration system called Etherlink. I clicked once. The full source code filled the screen. Today, I'm releasing Etherlink M as an open framework for ethical deployment by anyone who is willing to earn it. The room leaned forward. This system cannot be used unless the organization agrees to and signs the Ethical Deployment Covenant. I handed out physical copies of the 3-page document. 1. Transparent data use. 2. Inviolable user consent. 3. Zero tolerance for covert surveillance. Any organization that violates the covenant will have their license revoked. No exceptions. The system is now decentralized, but its gate still belongs to me. Someone in the back raised their hand. A quiet voice. What about Cornova? A pause. Then I answered without bitterness. Only truth. They no longer meet the threshold. Not technically. Not ethically. That afternoon, Cornova's CTO received the update. Their legal team submitted an application for access to Etherlink M. It was denied instantly. They hadn't even signed the covenant. I never responded. 3 days later, I received an invitation. Ms. Cade, Arctis Systems is interested in re-engineering our entire deployment infrastructure with a focus on ethical scale. We would like you to serve as our senior strategic advisor, on your terms. Sincerely, Elna Voss, CEO, Arctis Systems. I waited a day before replying, then asked one question. Did you sign the covenant? The response came within minutes. We already did. Yesterday. I closed the email. This time, I felt something settle inside me. Not pride, not revenge, just alignment. Later that week, I walked past the Cornova building downtown. It looked the same from the outside, glassy and tall, manicured with sharp branding and blinding lights. But I didn't stop, didn't look up. Instead, I crossed the street to a small cafe where my son waited, 2 cups of tea already steaming on the table. He looked at me and grinned. You did it, didn't you? I just nodded and placed the wooden USB down beside his cup. It's no longer about building systems, I said. It's about building the boundaries around them. He reached across the table and gently closed my hand over the USB again. Some things still belong to you. I smiled. For once. I had nothing left to prove, no board to convince, no access to beg for, no voice to raise in a room full of men who never listened until it was too late. I had turned my silence into infrastructure, and for the first time in 19 years, I finally felt seen, not because of what I'd built, but because of what I refused to let them take, for 19 years. I gave everything, my time, my talent, even moments with my own family, to build something bigger than myself. And in 44 minutes, they tried to erase me. But here's what they forgot. No one can revoke the power of knowing your worth. They may take your title, they may take your desk, but they can never take the truth you built with your own hands. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel invisible, know this: your silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes, it's just the sound of a boundary being drawn. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or are still surviving, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful journeys like this one. Because sometimes, The quietest ones rewrite the ending.